All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Relationship-Led Growth Live. And you can see there's a new person on with Joseph and I today. And we have the pleasure of having Brian Walsh from Force Management joining us. And Brian is, Brian, I'm going to let you tell people a little bit about yourself. You're the managing partner over there, but obviously you've got a lot of expertise on a number of things. So tell people why they should listen to you.
I don't know why they should listen, but that's a tough question. So we're a B2B focused sales engagement organization. We're a bunch of former sales leaders and B2B sellers ourselves. We help companies with their go-to-market strategy, their messaging, how they think through opportunity movement and qualification. And then we help sales leadership and company leadership think about how they run the business in terms of the operating rhythm and how they coach and develop people and those kinds of things. So we do a whole bunch of things along those 4 or 5 spectrums. I've been with the firm 11 years. We're almost 20 years, or we are 20 years old now. And before that, I was in the field for 27 years as a seller and a sales leader myself. So I just love what we get to do because we focus on the how, right? We don't focus on methodology. We focus on how do you make something actually stick in your organization and relevant for your marketplace. So it's all about execution, not academics, for lack of a better phrase. And I'm just thrilled to get the chance to talk with you both today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's gonna be a fun conversation. You talked about execution and what you guys do, and I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is about that to a certain extent. I think I'm going to tell a quick story. So we're going to talk about alignment and why it's important. Set the stage there. I'll tell a quick story about a past client of ours from a number of years ago. I'm not going to name them. Obviously, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, etc. But I guess if I haven't thrown anyone under the bus, it would be us because we kind of screwed some of that stuff up a number of years back. So what happened there is, we got engaged by them and to build, marketing plan and strategy and execute and things like that. And we did our thing, came in, met with a number of stakeholders, built a plan, very creative. We had a podcast, we had an activation plan. We even thought we had their, business development team bought in, although we brought them in late. That was mistake number 1. Probably number 2 actually. But anyway, we had, ads planned, all sorts of stuff. Launch goes off great. People are people are happy that this thing is going live, etc. And then mostly crickets. I mean, not completely crickets. It did some stuff, but it was not nearly as good as it should have been, and not nearly as good as we promised. And what happened is the biz dev team was simply not activating against any of these marketing assets that were being created. They were just kind of out there and nothing else was being done with them. And the executive team, we had a pretty tight target set for this. And the executive team was just after the fact going, well, no, we don't want to just limit it to this target. We don't want to, exclude anybody. So then the business development efforts were way too broad. They were not activating against the assets. They weren't going even against the same target. And then, not surprisingly, it did not work nearly as well. So that amongst a number of other, things led us to this whole idea of, well, it doesn't matter what kind of plan you have unless you have organizational alignment across a number of, core positioning and growth strategy elements. So before we started recording here, Brian, we were talking about this. I'm curious on your thoughts, kind of hearing that, and from a more from a business development perspective.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was making some notes as you were telling the story because it reminded me of what happens a lot, and it happens to us too, right? Nobody's perfect, right? But a lot of times we'll get brought in by an executive who runs the sales organization. Or we're talking with that person and their enablement and ops teams. We're talking with maybe a CEO or a COO. And before you know it, we've gotten ourselves an engagement, we've gotten the win, and then somebody like me shows up to start doing all of this work with our consulting team. And I show up into a room, and that's when we realize, the VP of marketing, the CMO, the chief product officer, whoever didn't know this was happening. They're in this room, and you can literally see it on their face if they don't say it. Why am I here? Sometimes they're really direct. I don't think we need this. Sometimes they're like, why am I here? Sometimes whatever. But that lack of alignment on the front end that we helped cause, like this, I'm not pointing at the customer, I'm pointing at us, right? Creates a moment where somebody like me or somebody else has got to resell what the rest of their company has already bought off on. Now, the good news is most of the time that goes well if you recognize it and you do something with it. But, here's the thing. If you think about a CEO, for example, choosing to spend time and money and resources on some engagement that's going to, it's got an intent to move the needle for the business. And that person or some group of people choose to do that and other people aren't involved and you don't recognize it, it's kind of like standing on the top of a mountain and pushing a big rock downhill, and there are other people standing on the side of the mountain. Like there's only two outcomes, right? They either get run over or they see it coming and they get out of the way. And so like we have learned, anything we can do to create that alignment on the front end through our discovery process, right? And anything we can do to have those conversations before the client signs. Now, I'm going to be careful. You don't want to sell past the close, and all of that. But there is a responsibility to say, well, wait a minute. Well, look, there's three big questions that are going on. Should we spend this money? Should we spend it with your organization? And how do we ensure a successful outcome? And it's that third question that's, in my mind, where alignment lives. And the without sounding too Pollyannic, the service I do for a client by helping them see that larger picture during the sales process, the engagement process, whatever phrase you like, I think is really, really critical.
Well, it's really if you think about it, it's a de-risking element, right? Because especially especially if we think about the macro environment we're in right now, where every dollar is being scrutinized and money is no longer free, all this kind of stuff, it's even more important, right? Everyone's proverbial butts are on the line every time they make a financial decision, and de-risking that up front. I mean, definitely during the sales process, we would argue you should be doing a lot of the stuff in your marketing even before they ever
absolutely. Right. And
that's the other piece of the alignment.
Yeah. No, you're right on it. Right. The best sellers in the world are great marketers first. They're good at creating awareness and consideration and all of that. But you brought up two things here. When you talked about de-risking, I immediately went back to last summer. I was in New York City with a client, and I was sitting there with their chief revenue officer, their CEO. This is a big company. They are public, well-known name in the marketing space. And their controller sat down with me at lunch. So I'm sitting with the three of them, and I had not met the controller yet. And what I didn't realize was the client was still trying to decide, hey, we're doing this big transformation project with Force Management. How are we going to roll it out? Are we going to roll it out virtually in a bunch of virtual sessions, or are we going to do 3 big meetings in 3 cities around the world, which is a huge expense, right? And so I didn't know that was happening, but they sit down for lunch and the controller says to me, hey, I have a question. What is Force Management seeing in the marketplace right now from a sales perspective? I said, well, probably nothing you aren't seeing, right? Because deals are getting smaller, they're getting more scrutiny, there's more people involved, higher levels of justification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I can probably confirm what you're hearing from your sales team. I said, but can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, well, let me start with a hypothesis. I want to make sure my point of view is right. I said, my hypothesis is that whatever the spending level was that required your sign off or your CFO sign off in the summer of 2022 is much lower now, summer of 23. And he laughed and he said, yes, it's $1. If we're going to spend $1, it's coming across my desk. I said, okay, good. I said, so here's my question. What percentage of those requests to spend money are jumping off of the screen or off of the desk if they're on paper when you are alone with them and grabbing you by the shoulders and shaking you and saying, you can't afford to not do this? And guess what he said?
Zero.
Zero. He said 0. And I said, well, then why are we here? Because you've signed the contract with us. He mentioned our salesperson, Frank, who's an amazing sales guy, a longtime sales leader and all of that. He says, because Frank made it clear to us that we could not afford to not do this. And what he put in front of us stands on its own and can speak for itself. And so to your point of de-risking, our ability to communicate that on the front end is critically important. Now, here's the other part of this that jumped out when you mentioned this. The other thing that happens, Mike, when you have this alignment mindset is I have these conversations with like technology salespeople. Imagine I am selling a cybersecurity technology against a named competitor, and the competitive sales rep show up on the same day. Whether maybe I'm selling a service and the services competitor is showing up at the same day, it doesn't matter. But we enter that sales campaign on the same day. And in every conversation I have, I'm focused on the day that I care about, which is the day you pick me and sign a contract. But the day the competition shows up, every conversation they have is focused on getting to an outcome, getting the customer to an outcome. So I'm not just de-risking that moment, but that competitive sales rep is going to beat me 9 times out of 10 because that competitive sales rep has a perspective that's all about how do I drive to an outcome, not your outcome, not how do I get an order. And that conversation will open doors and put conversations on the table for the customer to think through that I will never put on the table, which means that person's going to get access to more people. That person's going to get past the why should you do this with us and more focus on why should you do this now and how do you ensure a successful outcome. It happens every single time. Stop worrying about getting the deal or the engagement, worry about getting the customer to an outcome and watch the doors start to open. No magic bullet, but in more cases than not, that's what starts to happen.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, Mike, we talk about this a lot here, but it's one of the biggest challenges we've seen with business development teams and marketing, that everybody wants to focus on their own product. They want to focus on themselves, their features and benefits. But, from what I've seen, really successful salespeople and really successful marketing focuses on the customer, the pain point problem they're trying to solve. And when you can talk about outcomes, like you're saying, and something that's really become apparent to me over the last year is marketing a lot of times focuses on tactical outcomes. And then they wonder why they can't get budget for campaigns, or get priority, rather than focusing on what are the business outcomes, what are the business objectives, where's the value creation for the organization that I'm working with, kind of like you're talking about. How does the marketing that we're creating show the CFO that there's value creation here compared to, how do we show them that our marketing campaigns are going to bump website traffic by 10% or something like that?
Well, he's not going to like that. I'm going to call him out in public, but I'm going to do it. I actually, anybody who knows me knows this is probably coming. I have an identical twin brother. True story. You guys don't know that. Pat sits on the other side of the desk. He's been in operational leadership positions his whole career. And Pat will tell you, and he talks about this with other operational leaders all the time, I don't care who we buy from. Like, he's got people who make that decision. He's got people who on his team who are better at saying, hey, doing this engagement with proof point marketing is a better choice for us than doing it with this marketing organization. What Pat cares about is not who they buy from. Pat cares about being able to defend the conversation with, you just said it, Joseph, with the CFO or the CEO, which is at some point in the future, hey, why did we spend this money? What is it getting the business? If he can't answer that question on the front end, he's not signing the contract.
And very often they're defending that before the engagement ever kicks off.
Right.
Because there's
right. But then they've got to be able to defend it later on.
Yeah.
Right.
There's one piece here when we're talking about risk, and we could derail on this, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time, but I think it's actually
there's a whole separate conversation we can have around just de-risking and all that fun stuff, although it definitely relates to all this stuff.
Yeah. When you're figuring out about alignment, and then we're talking about risk, I found that if you really want to have messaging that connects, and you want to have sales language that connects, you have to realize that it's not just the business risk that somebody's taking, but the personal risk that they're taking. And that's what you just described. That's personal risk for your brother when he has an opportunity that comes in that he hasn't vetted and he can't give a good answer on that. And yes, there's business risk tied to that, but ultimately he's asking the question, am I going to get fired if I give
or am I
approval
going to be
for
allowed
this?
to sign those contracts anymore?
There's a flip side to this, which is in a professional services setting, the way you de-risk is you build trust, because you don't have access to a lot of the other tools that like a product firm would
Right.
have to de-risk something, like either contractually or whatever. Like services firms almost never give at least not
Right.
advisor firms, you can't give a money back guarantee
Demo.
for
And you can't do a
$1 million
demo.
engagement
Yeah.
or whatever,
Right. Yeah.
like, so and that trust has two aspects to it, right? There's the personal trust, which is, do I trust you, Mr. Salesperson or Mrs. Salesperson, on what that you know what you're talking about, that you're not overselling me, all of these kinds of things.
Right.
And then there's the organizational trust. Do I trust your organization? Do you have the reputation in the market for delivering these results? Am I, are the people that you're going to place on this project, do I trust that they can deliver what you're saying? Like that's the flip side to that risk coin, both the personal and organizational.
And again, so that it doesn't sound like it's just a de-risking conversation. Everything we're talking about here in the last 5 minutes, it's all about differentiation as well. I mean, if you do these things well, it is a massive differentiator. In fact, I was with a client last week. Another part of their company had done a whole bunch of stuff with us. That was their first this division's first engagement. And at the end, their leaders looked at his group and said, I have to tell you, everything the force management said they were going to do, they have done, and they have done it in the way they said they would do it. That is the ultimate proof point in terms of alignment, because of who he had in the room. It wasn't just his sales team. They were 40% of the collective whole. Massive differentiator. I love that.
Yeah. And I think this is where we can easily bring things back to alignment, which is the differentiator or differentiators are those core positioning elements that there has to be organizational alignment around.
Yeah.
Who are we? Why are we different? Who do we do it for? And what is it that we do for them? Like, what problems do we solve? All these things, you have to have alignment across your entire organization. Otherwise, you can't build that trust. You can't do the de-risking that you need to do.
Right. Well, imagine if you're going to really create alignment inside of a potential client's organization. That means everybody, and we were talking about this before, right? Everybody inside of your organization's got to be able to go carry that mantle on their own. Right. I mean, I'm sure you guys do too. We work with organizations and sometimes there are 3 people in the decision process. Other times there are 30. Right. And when the bigger that group gets, the more apt I versus one of our salespeople versus one of our consultants, et cetera, are apt to be more likely we are to be in a meeting by ourselves. And we have to know that everybody in our company who's having these individual conversations with with a group who eventually is going to end up in a room together without us there, right? That there's commonality of message and how we speak, and the fact that we understand that this is about helping the client get to a collective yes. Uh-oh. You're on mute, Mike.
Mike, you're muted.
Put myself on mute. The 2 things you said there are, I think, really important to emphasize is this organizational alignment of the bigger the company gets, like every person matters, because every person is going to have a conversation at some point with a client or prospect.
Yeah.
And then this idea of there's going to be a conversation. The most important conversation happens without you in the room.
Yeah.
You're not going to be there. You're not going to get a chance to be there and influence that. Like you've done everything you can to influence a decision. That's it. Like that conversation now happens without you there.
Yeah. Here's a great example of that. I was in a room a few years ago with 500 salespeople and solutions architects, et cetera. And this organization has a group of former C-level IT and IT security leaders. And we were having this very conversation about the collective yes and alignment across a company. And it's okay, you can enter an opportunity anywhere, but your job is to not live in that person's office, but to expand the whole conversation across every different perspective. And he stood up and he grabbed the microphone and he said, listen, I think as salespeople that when an organization that's got 6, 8, 10 people involved in a buying decision goes through that process, that that everybody's got a different role. That they have they enter and exit at different times. They all have different perspectives. All that. He said, you even know that eventually we start to get together without you in the room to make decisions. And he said, but here's what I'm afraid you don't know. And the room got really quiet, me included, which is hard. And he says, what I'm afraid you don't know is that 90% of the time when we get together during a buying decision, early, mid, or late, and choose to do nothing and move on to another topic, he said 90% of the time, that's because the 10 or 12 people in the room can't get to a collective yes. And then he said this, what I need you to understand is it's the best salespeople, and then he said, anybody who's customer facing, it's the best salespeople who have the backbone to look whoever they're in the eye. And then he pointed at me and say what that guy just said, which is, look, whoever I'm in front of, I'm going to help them see that there's a bigger picture so that if they start to, give me the Heisman and, like keep me away from other people in their organization or whatever game they may play or not play, I can look in the eye and say, listen, Mike, whether you do business with us or not, that's not the question to be answered. The question to be answered is how do you and the other 6 or 8 or 10 people, we're in these conversations every day. We know there's 6, 8 or 10 of you involved. How do you get to a collective yes? I'm not trying to go around you or over you. I'm trying to go with you because I won't dishonor them if they're not in the room, and I won't dishonor you if I'm in a meeting and you're not there. My job is to help all of you get to the right outcome. If I'm the right choice, I'm in. If I'm not, I'll know before you do, and I'll look you in the eye and I'll tell you, and I might actually be able to give you some good advice on the other side. Now, that was a lot, but that's like the reality is, I think you've got to be able to look people in the eye and say, look, I am here to help all of you get to the outcome that matters. Because I actually think that's a qualification moment as much as anything else. Because if you're not up for that conversation, if you still push back on me, well, that tells me I may not disqualify the opportunity, but I might disqualify you, right? I might realize, okay, this person isn't up for change. He's not going to support change, but this is still an important thing for his organization. So I'm going to have to go find some other ways to talk to people. That's the other thing that's going on here.
And the question for me in those situations is, why are they pushing back? Right? What did we put in front of them that's not allowing them to do so? And I think again, this is where maybe getting into some more of the tactical stuff makes sense. Is this kind of connecting the dots between this de-risking thing, right? It's in the alignment side. It's not like they know that this is a problem. Nobody goes into a buying decision because just for the hell of it, right? They know there's an issue that supposedly needs solving. Whether they're going to take action on it or not, who knows, right? So the de-risking side again goes into, well, do I believe that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and that this is actually going to solve my problem the way that I see my problem? And that means on the front end, you need to have alignment across, really the entire organization. We can get into a couple of different subsets of that in a second. But again, what problem are we solving in detail?
Oh, there it is. That's the first
question.
What
are we actually solving? How do we solve it? And how can we prove that we are good at solving it? Because that last part is like the first two get you in the door. That last one gets you through the door.
Gets it over the line. Yeah, it gets it over the line, right? And it's boy, you just brought up, well, that's where we live, right? That our whole world is about helping people have conversations. Methodology is one thing, but methodology is really hard to execute if you don't know how it aligns with the industry that you serve, right? So what we are big on is saying, okay, that's good. Methodology is great. You got to have something you can fall back on to save yourself if you don't have a lot of specific knowledge, but at least you can have a good conversation. But it's in the content that's specific to your industry, to the questions you just asked. What are the problems that we solve? And if I can start every conversation there, A, I can force you to choose the topic that you care about. B, now we're into the conversation that matters, and you're opening up the door to, and you're just by choosing the topic, you're giving me more right to go wider and deeper in the conversation than I would have, and help you think about the other people alignment, right, that we're going to have to engage. You're giving me the right to add points of view about things we've seen other people do, not products we've seen them buy, but, you know, challenges we've seen them try to solve, outcomes we've seen them drive to, so that I can then start to influence, well, what's really required to build the bridge that you thought was like this wide, but it's actually this wide. And I'm giving you a better chance of building that bridge because I'm helping you think through it, not just from your perspective, but multiples. Now, the other thing you mentioned is where I enter. Like a lot of times, no matter what we do for a living, we're entering buying decisions at a mid to lower level in a customer's organization, right? Like, when's the last time your first call was with a company CEO? It's just, especially if you're a salesperson, quote unquote, right? So we're big believers that you should take the access you can get. I'll take the access, but I'm also not going to set up camp in your office. And through the conversations we have, I'm going to help you realize that there are other people that you and I need to go get to. I know we talked about that, but more importantly, I'm going to help you realize that no matter where you sit in the organization, if you're only looking at this conversation from your perspective, you're missing a lot of stuff that other people care about, whether they're above you or below you. And here's the example that I think always rings true when I'm in a group with sellers and their entire teams, because every salesperson in the world has dealt with this. They've had a really good conversation with Joseph. Joseph is more of a technical kind of buyer. He cares about who we're going to buy from. He may have some sense of the problem that we're trying to help Mike and the leadership team solve for, but this happens all the time. We give Joseph our proposal because he's the one that's got to take it over to Mike. And we're sitting at our desk waiting for a phone call on how the meeting went. And the phone call often goes like this. Joseph calls the salesperson and says, hey, good meeting with my boss, but Mike's got a bunch of questions I got to go get the answers to. And the reason that happens is because as salespeople, we fail Joseph. We send Joseph upstairs to go have an economic buying conversation, and he's having it from a technical or a product level. So Joseph and Mike aren't meeting on a level playing field. As a seller, I've got to help Joseph realize that when you carry that message forward, we have to help you carry it in the language that Mike cares about. What's this going to do for the business? How do we know it's going to do it? And to your point, how sure are you that these guys from Force Management can deliver? That's very different than, Joseph, here's why you should buy from us.
Yep. So,
and what I'm doing in that sales conversation is I'm creating alignment.
And you're creating value for the person that you're working with, because you're helping them level up how they're viewing the problem. And if you can help them present the problem aligned with company, again, going back to business objectives, value creation, and you're helping them do that, you're helping them get a promotion in their organization. You're helping them get future opportunities and be able to think differently. So you're actually adding an incredible amount of value to that other person as well. One question I have is,
that's a great point.
Just to make this super tactical, what are some of the things that you recommend doing to help equip the person on the other end prepare for that conversation? Because if they've never done that before, you're talking about getting access at the right level. So then if you're going to do that, sometimes you're going to get in with somebody who's never had that conversation before. And they go, hey, I know we have this problem. Leadership doesn't really recognize it, but I know that this is really causing an issue for the delivery team. I've tried bringing it up. It's not working. So I don't even see the value in going further with this unless, something changes. How do you help that person now take that to the next level?
I think there are three things you have to be good at. And by the way, there are no silver bullets in this life, right? But if you're really good at these three things, I think you'll be in a better position to identify whether or not this is a real opportunity for us in the first place. The first thing you have to do is you have to have content that is specific to your marketplace, right? It ain't no good if I know all about cybersecurity if I'm talking to somebody who lives in the MarTech space, right? And they're helping organizations connect with customers through their apps on their iPhones. I know that sounds obvious, but it happens all the time. Organizations give, and listen, when I first got out of college, I got spin selling training, which was great, but nobody helped me at first take it and apply it to our business, our marketplace, the products I was selling and the problems it solved, et cetera. So that's the first thing. You've got to give people relevant content, not scripts. Like, I don't mean you give people scripts, but you give people really good content that a well-trained, prudent salesperson knows how to use, right? That's the first thing. The second thing I think you got to do, and that goes back to what Mike talked about. What problems do we solve? How do we solve them? How do we solve them better? What's our proof? That's the kind of content you got to give people. The second thing I think you got to give people is you have to give them, well, let me start with where most of us as sellers have been at some point in our life. Most of us, me included, would go into an organization and say, hey, can you walk me through your decision process? Well, I got bad news for you. 90% of people don't know their decision process, and the other 10% don't care or don't want to tell you. Like, right? You know, that's a little flip, but you get the point. So my point of view is, why are we asking customers about that when we probably know the decision process in our space better than they do anyhow? How many times do your customers, whatever you do for a living, how often does that given customer buy that thing? Once every 3 years, once every 6 months, whatever it is. So I'm a big believer, you should give your people a really tight point of view that they can use visually or verbally or on the back of a barroom napkin that says, hey, first time I meet you, Joseph, here's what we've learned. When we meet someone who's a director of growth and we're having this kind of conversation for their business, we know that the following 4, 5, or 6 other roles are going to show up. How do you and I start to think about, in an appropriate time and place, not right now, we're not going to run down the hall, but now what have I done? I've done 2 things. One, I've made it clear to you, listen, I need you to know that I know that you know that I know that this is how these things get done, whether you buy from us or not. So I'm actually removing that potential objection of you trying to not let me go talk to people by at least saying to you, I already know who these other people are. But more importantly, to your point that you've now made a couple of times, I'm helping you. I'm helping you realize, hey, Joseph, whether you buy from us or not, these are the other people that are going to have to be in the room. And it's all 6 or 7 of those perspectives that are going to matter. So that's the second thing I think you got to be really good at. You do those 2 things really well. Now you're arming people to go have conversations with customers from a discovery perspective that go wider and deeper, attached to the business, and allow you to start to influence with points of view and stories on how people are thinking. And then here's the third thing you got to do. I think you've got to be really good at looking Joseph in the eye at some point and say, okay, so Joseph, you and I both know you're going to go see Mike next Tuesday with this proposal. Let's get in a conference room, and I'm going to sit in Mike's chair, and you're going to present to me. There's got to be a way for you to help Joseph get ready. By the way, it's another test, right? I'm testing, are you up for that conversation? Are you ready for that conversation? Can you carry the water for us when we're not there? Will you carry the water for us when we're not there? So those are, in my mind, those are the big 3. There's probably 20 things, but if I could have 3 things, if I could have every business development person, salesperson, whatever, who represents our organization do really well, it's those 3 things.
I love that. And to where my mind is going, excuse me, for all the, to be able to do all those things well, one of the things you have to have internal alignment on your side is who exactly is our ICP? Like, what are they all about? Right? Because I was just half the time as you were talking, I was thinking about a recent client engagement. It's fresh in my mind. I was talking to the head of one of the practice areas of a management consulting firm, and we're figuring out, they want to launch some campaigns, etc. And one of the things I asked him, I go, who's your target? Oh, well, I mean, we can do this for anybody. I'm like, no. I understand you could do it for anybody. I get that.
Yeah.
But who do you do best at? I'm like, well, it's these and these and these. I'm like, okay, where do you, and going down that list of, problem, how do you do better, et cetera. I'm like, well, where do you have the most case studies? Oh, we work really well with nonprofits. Okay, let's start there. What is it that you do for nonprofits? Well, it's this. I'm like, what's your special sauce? Well, it's our people. No, it's not. That's not it. Like, so you go through this whole thing of like aligning on these things of really deeply understanding who is that target so that you can have these conversations. Because otherwise, Joseph comes in the room with me and he's having a conversation about a problem that I don't even think we really have. And then what's the point?
There it is. Why is this a problem?
Right.
Like, I don't see this as a problem. It may be your problem because you live down here in the basement, right? But I'm up here thinking about tomorrow, and that's not a problem in my mind worth stroking a check for. Not now,
Yep.
not right now. It's not the way you framed it. It's not.
Yep.
And it's the old, when a sales rep or anybody comes back from a sales call and says, hey, I think I found myself an opportunity. The first question I'm asking is, great, what's the problem and how big is it? Who owns it? What happens if they don't solve for it effectively? Because if you can't answer those 4 questions, I'm not saying the deal's dead. I am saying the deal's probably going to take longer. It's going to be harder to get over the line. You're going to get your head bashed in at the pricing table, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go figure that out and help Joseph figure that out. I've had this happen way too many times. Heck, I'm having a visceral moment internally right now to a conversation I had with a client 15 plus years ago, and it was a very large client. It was an 8-figure client for us per year. And he called me and said, hey, we have a problem. I thought, what did one of our people do? He says, no. My new boss just came into my office and asked me why we're spending X million dollars a year with your company. And my answer was, you guys have a really good sales rep. It was not a pretty 6-12 months inside of that organization. Because what did we end up spending our next 6-12 months doing? Proving again.
Trying to prove the value.
Right. By the way, that was our fault. That wasn't his fault.
Yep.
We actually knew it. We had a really good answer. But then for the next 6-12 months, we just had to keep explaining and proving to people that truly was the answer. That's our fault, not his.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the kind of bring things back there are kind of 3 layers, if you will, of internal alignment that we consistently look at. One is sales and marketing. Obviously, everybody talks about that, right? And that's alignment on all the things we were just talking about, who's the target in detail, what problems are we solving, all this stuff. Am I going to repeat it again?
And how are we messaging at the highest end to create awareness and consideration? And then because we have to be honest with each other, the messaging marketing needs to do one thing. The messaging that I need as the tip of the spear or as a part of a sales campaign is as one of our co-founders likes to say, it's to serve the 3-foot conversation across the desk. And while those 2 messages have got to do this, they got to link, it is different language. And we have to be okay with that. We have to allow marketing to speak in the way marketing speaks while sales speaks in the way they speak, as long as those 2 things intermesh, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's different. Sales needs more flexibility, the way I see it, and having that conversation, right? It can't be a script here are the 3 phrases that you can say. You should have those 3 phrases available to you, and you have key words most likely that you use. In our case, it's activation is a word that we consistently hear. We consistently want to use in both sales and marketing. Alignment is another one, which is why we're talking about it today. Right. There are these key themes and key words that we want to make sure that we use. But in the sales conversation, depending on who I'm talking to, depending on what kind of day they're having, whatever it is, a number of things impact what I'm actually going to say, what their past experience is, things like that.
And where I'm going to take the alignment conversation, right? Yeah. So, we love the phrase, we call that the concept of being audible ready, right? I show up for a meeting with Mike, ready to have one conversation, but then somebody named Joseph shows up. Can I call, football, right? Can I call the audible and change the play appropriately? I'm still planning on talking about alignment today, but that was at Mike's level. But now this person, Joseph, showed up. I got to figure out where he sits, how he views the world, so that I can change the play appropriately. And by the way, if I got somebody from my organization with me, can they follow that lead? And that only happens if we've got internal alignment around the language that we use and how we think about progressing a conversation with a customer.
Yeah, and this actually gets in. Go ahead, Joseph. Go for it.
where I've really seen this break down is the CEO goes, and I've seen this over and over and over again at companies I've worked with and clients, where the CEO goes, "Oh, we're aligned, we're all on the same page, we all, have got the same thing going on." But I've worked in sales, marketing, and delivery at different companies before, and almost always there's a disconnect between what marketing is saying and what sales says, and then again a disconnect between what sales is saying and what delivery says can actually be done. And when you have that misalignment like that, like you need to have the flexibility, but it can't be so flexible that sales is selling something that delivery then comes back and says, "Oh, we can't quite do it like that. It's a little different." And that's where you start getting into like serious challenges.
One thing it also
gets
at, like, I was the quick thing is it gets at this idea of, when you at face value, everybody wants to, like, nobody wants to throw anybody under the bus. Nobody wants to say that something is not working. I mean, we see this all the time. It's like, oh, how is your, like if you ask a basic question, how do you think marketing is doing? Oh, marketing is great. We love marketing. Or vice versa. Like, hey, how do you think the business development team is doing with the leads you're sending? Oh, they're awesome. They're doing great things. And then you start asking deeper questions. Well, is marketing giving you the content you need? Oh, no, we don't actually use a lot of the content. Is business development giving you feedback based on, what's happening in pipeline? No, we don't really we don't hear from them often enough, whatever it is. Like,
here's the one I love. Hey, delivery. Tell me about the conversations you have to have with clients after, somebody gets a win. Oh, I got to go ask them what they bought and why they bought it. What? But it happens all the time. And I'm just here to tell you, I know enough people on the other side of the desk to tell you that's something that drives customers just up a wall. They're like, wait a minute, you don't know why we bought this? I'm the one that's got to educate you. You like, well, what's happening? Did your sales team get a deal and just throw it over the fence and say, good luck, let me know if you need some help? So, this is such a critical conversation that you're having. These different players that, enter and exit, the customer life cycle at different points in times. If your whole view is, oh, my job is to do X, I think you're missing a big part of the story. Your job is certainly to do X, but it's in service of anyone who comes after you, so that when they show up in front of the customer, our whole point of view is, and like we try to hold ourselves to the standard. We're not perfect, but our whole point of view is, if a salesperson from our team has been working with a client, and then they bring a solutions architect in, and then they bring one of our leaders in, and then maybe they bring me in because I'm one of the facilitators who runs these engagements. By the time I show up, if I don't know everything that a sales team has already talked with the client about, and I don't have that fluency, I should look like an idiot to the customer. They should be unimpressed, right? So everything that we're all doing is in service not only of the client, but it's in service of the next person showing up, and the client feeling like, oh my gosh, you've been here. It feels like you've been here from the beginning, because they never have to take 2 steps back to take 1 step forward. So
yeah, and that gets into one of the other things that's key in the potential misalignment category, if you will, which is alignment on roles and responsibilities.
Yeah,
like I see this all the time where, again, like you said, well, I'm just going to use sales and marketing as an example, but marketing thinks their only job, and this is like a broken model of, hey, the only point of interaction and communication is the lead, and everything else is year over year.
We're making a very general, broad brush statement here. Yeah.
But I mean, see it happen all the time. But like, again, like what is the actual role of marketing? Not just broad strokes, but the detail. Like what should they be responsible for, and vice versa? What should business development be responsible for? What are the business development should be responsible for feedback loops and things like that, and providing insights from sales conversations on a consistent basis, all this kind of stuff. Marketing should make sure that they're involving business development early and developing content that's actually usable for activation, something we talked about earlier.
Right.
All these types of things.
So it's, the way I describe it to clients when we talk about our organization, when it's time for us to talk about our organization, how we're set up and how we engage, I'll explain to clients, listen, you're going to meet different force management people. I just want you to understand that we're all in the same pool together. We're just in different swim lanes, probably swimming different strokes, all with the same intent, which is to get to the other end of the pool, which is your outcomes. Now, it's not the perfect analogy, but it paints the picture that I need them to see, which is I'm going to be showing up and doing certain things with the intent to help get to the outcomes, while our solutions architect is doing that, while some of our consultants or program managers are doing that, while our success team is doing that. I just need them to see that every person who shows up certainly has their own set of responsibilities, but it's all in service of each other internally, but more importantly, getting to the other end of the pool with you externally. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Works for me.
So here's the other. There's a question that came in earlier. That's a quick question, but it's a pretty broad one. We'll cover it in a second. I'll read it in a second. But what other I think level of alignment that causes a lot of these issues that we've talked about in professional services firms in particular, management, consulting, advisory, et cetera, is misalignment that we see across the partners or the executive leadership or the practice leads, whatever the titles are, right? They might not be partners per se, but
right. I'm a this, you're a that. Everybody makes up their own title, whatever.
Right. But the partners in broad strokes, and we see this quite a bit as these organizations grow. And originally they have this tight kind of, hey, we're going to grow in this way. We're going to do this thing for this industry, whatever. And then they develop more and more practice areas. And the next thing you know, this person over here thinks that that your special sauce is X, and you want to go after the mid market, but this person over in that's the magic sauce, the magic place. And this person over here thinks, well, no, we think our special sauce actually is another thing, and we need to grow in a different way, whatever. And they might both be right, but if everyone's doing their own thing, you start running into all these problems. And marketing's
if everybody's doing their own thing, I'll say it. If everybody's doing their own thing, nobody's right.
Right.
That's the answer. And some people don't like this sometimes when I go down this road, but we see this, Mike, where an organizational leader will say, okay, we're going to do this engagement with you. So let me just put it in the customer's world first, and then I'll bring it back to the example you threw out there. And we'll start to see that person abdicating their responsibility to lead. And before you know it, we're talking to the chief revenue officer or the CEO, and we're saying, listen, you need to understand, I know that you're pushing this down to your 3 theater leads around the world, right? The Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pac, whatever. But just understand, if you push the responsibility for this down a level, at least one of those people will probably push it down a level. And then somebody in that organization will push it down a level. So you're going to achieve a series of outcomes that are significantly reduced by a massive order of magnitude because you are not leading from the front through your actions and your behaviors. So how does that apply to what you just said? Listen, if you're running a services organization, if you're running a software company, I don't care what it is you do for a living. If you're the one running the organization, there are times where you have to look at people like me, these managing partners, managing directors, senior this, whatever they are, and say, hey, I get it, but we're not doing that right now. That's not where we are taking the puck. Now, sometimes you're able to do that. Sometimes you have enough bandwidth to say, yeah, okay, you go do your mid-market thing while we go do this thing over here. But there are times you got to make a decision as to, sorry, can't do all 3. We can only do 1. And here's what it's going to be. Now, that's what it means to lead. Doesn't always feel good, but what are your options? Just let people go do their own thing. It never goes well.
Yep. Well, and more specifically, what we've seen for like the consulting advisory firms is it can work until a certain point.
Yeah.
But what they end up with is, ideally what you have is some point of integration where a client that's using this practice area services can also buy this practice area services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you've spread your ICP so wide that this group over here goes after these people and this group over here goes after these people only, and they're not it's not a Venn diagram, it's separate circles. Right. You just created a point where you're diminishing the level of growth you can have as an overall firm. Sure, this department might grow, but you're making it harder for each department to grow individually actually by doing that.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't seem like it.
No. All of a sudden 1 + 1 = 1.
You create this internal kind of like cliques within your organization or individualistic attitude
Oh,
in your
yeah.
organization. And then it's like, well, I'm not going to share my client with this other division over here because this is my client and I'm not going to lose them. And, we recently had a lot of talks about this particular thing, exactly, which is the best salespeople, especially in the larger organizations, are good at being more open-handed with their relationships and, kind of sharing those relationships around and kind of getting the consensus for the sake of their customer. But if you don't have that alignment, you don't even know who these other guys are in your company or what they're doing or what they're up to or the value they bring.
You just literally made me twitch when you said the classic, this is my client. The moment I hear that is the moment I remind people, whether they work for me or not, it's not your client, it's our client. No one person owns a client. Unless you're a one-person shop, it's not your client, it's our client. That's how we play here. So Mike, I got to know, you said you had a really long question. What is it?
Oh, so let's see. I'm going to read this. This came in from Sharaf from Switzerland. It says, how could a PS strategically integrate talent acquisition, technological advancement, and client acquisition efforts to promote sustainable growth in a dynamic market landscape?
Whoa. Can
It's
we do
a
that
loaded
again?
question.
Can we do that again?
Usually I'm able to pull this up, but for some reason it's not popping up in the comments.
Read that again. Just read it to me again.
So how could a PS strategically integrate talent acquisition, technological advancement, and client acquisition efforts to promote sustainable growth in a dynamic market landscape? I've got my thoughts on this, but Brian,
you go. You've had a chance to chew on this for a minute. You go. I want to see where you take it.
I mean, I'm going to tie this back to a lot of the alignment pieces. I think if we're talking about talent acquisition, you have to have the same core alignment that we talked about across the partners between sales and marketing, et cetera. Otherwise, you end up bringing in people. And I think if we talk even business development or sales in particular, I think I've seen an article on Force Management site talking about like, you have to know who the right person is, not just like what skills they have necessarily,
That's right.
But who they are, what they believe, maybe even which industries they have experience with and where they're networked, like all this kind of stuff. Like you have to have this alignment first so that you know who the heck to hire. It's not just about hiring a great salesperson, right? Or
that's right. And then on the other side of it, you can ask yourself this question. Let's assume that somebody has to interview with 4 different people in your company before they get hired, right? Ask yourself this question. If I come through that process, am I going to have 4 completely different impressions of who you guys are? Now, I should have 4 different conversations. I shouldn't have to tell 4 different people the same thing. Like you should be looking for one set of skills and attributes. Joseph should be looking for another with maybe a little bit of overlap, that kind of thing. But I should at least walk away knowing that you all believe the same things about who you are as an organization. And that's the thing we see a lot. Because we do a lot of work with organizations on talent development of people. And we start with well, wait a minute, what are you looking for? To the point that you just made. Let's identify what that looks like. But then eventually we move to now you got to remember, as a candidate, I got to be everything I say I am. But through that process, you guys have to prove that you're everything you say you are. So I think that's a really good place to start, Mike.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The other piece in here, technological advancement. I mean, honestly, I think of that last pretty much across the board. Like it's something that will either, I think, it's going to multiply either the alignment or the misalignment that you have within the organization.
That's a really good way to say it. Right? You're right. Yeah, it will. It'll expose all the flaws, or it'll make it easier to be who you truly are. Maybe that's
so I think that comes first. And then, I mean, client acquisition, again, I think that's to be able to do it. It's exactly all the stuff that we talked about. I mean, I think we've kind of answered a lot of the stuff that goes into this. And Sharaf, if you're still on, if you're looking for some more detail, put a comment. I don't know if we're answering the question, but that's
a pretty big question.
I know.
There's a lot to it. I like it. But man, you really have to get in a room and unpack that. There's 2 or 3 things going on in that question.
Yep, exactly. So one other thing, I know we're going to be wrapping up here soon. One other thing I want to make sure we cover, and I think it's really important, is most people, I feel like, think of alignment. I know I did back in the day. It's like, oh, we have to have an alignment conversation. We're going to create this alignment, and then it's there. We're good.
Move on. Yeah.
But it's the reality is it's totally not like that. Right? Like if you want consistent and or accelerated growth, you have to have consistent alignment throughout, and you have to have a system to keep that alignment in check, where you can go, oh, looks like we're going off the rails. Let's bring this thing back before it does.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's not one thing. It's not a one-time thing. It's an all the time thing.
Yeah.
Right. And go ahead. You were going to say something.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I mean, the question, even kind of going back to Travis' question a little bit about talent acquisition, right? Anytime you're bringing a new person into the mix, you have to create alignment with that person. If you're creating a new department, you have to make sure that everybody bringing out of that department has alignment to whatever you have in place. Otherwise, you're going to end up with these situations that we were talking about.
And I think that's a good example as to why alignment actually inside of an organization, it starts with the tone and the behaviors at the top, but it actually lives at the first line leadership level. Right. And so, like, if you compare that concept to a sports team, the head coach or the coordinators, they're almost mini head coaches. So what's their job? Or any second, third line manager inside of an organization. Your job is to set the tone, set the culture, and teach your frontline leaders how to coach. That's your job. Teach people how to coach. Your frontline leaders, their job is to coach skill, right? The wide receiver coach teaches wide receivers how to catch the ball. Quarterback coach teaches quarterbacks how to be a quarterback. So everybody above them, they're creating an environment where we teach people how to coach. We hold people accountable to being good coaches. Frontline, my job is to coach skill. And that's where the day-to-day alignment happens because of how I behave as a frontline leader. I think when people like go through this kind of thing that we do, and I tell them this all the time, and we get to a conversation about this, I go, listen, most organizations do this kind of thing, and they focus on their individual contributors almost exclusively. And that is a huge mistake, because if you have the right second, third line leaders and the right frontline leaders, all the right individual contributors will follow. So that's my take on this whole thing, Mike. Get your frontline leaders right and over rotate on their ability to coach and run the business effectively. That's where you get alignment inside of the company, because they're doing it every day with individual interactions on live client opportunities and those kinds of things, while you're up here thinking about strategy.
Yep. Yeah. Well, one last thing to maybe mention around the alignment being a consistent thing, I'm curious on your thoughts on this, is, again, people think of it as a one-off thing, not just it's a one-off thing that we did, but the thing that we aligned on is static. And the reality is that's not the case either, right?
No,
every time there's some sort of market shift, you need to realign on who you're targeting. Is that problem that you were solving still a problem? Is it a bigger problem or a smaller problem? Is there now a bigger problem that you need to solve?
Yeah.
Do you need to innovate something new that you're now like all these things? You have to be able to like look ahead, honestly, and be like, hey, we're probably going to need to realign on X, Y, and Z, because this thing's coming whether we like it or not.
Yeah, when we create content with a client around, like, for example, for the sales conversation, we tell them 3 reasons to take a look at your content. A, something significant has happened in the market. There's a new business problem we are relevant to. B, something significant has happened to the product. There's some capability that helps solve for those problems better. C, time. Like, if you don't touch that content once every 6 months, it's probably getting stale. So you're absolutely right. Or the other thing I like to say, like, when we're in that, because, part of what we do is that training moment. When we're in that training moment, I make it really clear to folks, hey, today is nothing more than the end of the beginning. Like that's what this is. Like, we've just landed something into the organization. Now the question is, how do we turn you into an organization where this is the DNA? And when I'm a brand new person, I'm going to start getting dipped in that DNA on day one. That's how you got to start thinking about it.
I think that's probably as good a place to end as any. Brian,
Well, this has
been awesome. It's been fun. I know you've got back-to-backs. I do as well. Everybody else, thank you for joining. Joseph, thank you as always for running the show.
Great
And
conversation.
we will
Thanks,
see you
everybody.
all
It was a pleasure.
in a couple of weeks. Thanks,
All right.
Brian.
Hope to see you again. See you guys. Thanks again.
Bye.